So, a few things have happened since I stopped recording on Sunday doing the breakdown, and there were some things that also happened during that game that I said I was going to bring up on this episode, so now is that time. So, a few things I want to talk about. First off, you may have noticed that Ryan Williams was actually interviewed after the game. I didn't talk about it in the original breakdown of the game, but I thought it was definitely worth mentioning. The reason I even mention it is this, again, goes back to all the stuff we've talked about kind of all summer, the difference in DeBoer and Saban kind of doing it their own way. DeBoer is allowing Ryan Williams to speak to the media. You may be like, why is that super important? Well, if you knew anything about Saban's media policy, no freshmen, no assistant coaches speaking to the media. And in DeBoer's case, he has a freshman speaking to the media, has no problem with it. Another thing that they do differently is on their radio show, Saban used to bring in a media member, and DeBoer plans to bring on a player. He's going to highlight kind of each week of his show. So that is, obviously something small, but differences in the guys. The reason I mentioned also the Ryan Williams thing, he had, what's going to go down is probably one of the best quotes that they asked about his connection with Jaylen Milroe, and he said, well, 4 + 2 does equal 6. So obviously that's something you're going to see on T-shirts, and I'm sure kind of thrown out there, and I thought it was really funny. Another thing that's come out about Ryan Williams this week, actually, is Ryan Williams and Jaylen Mbakwe released their podcast and announced that they're going to be coming out with one. The university and the Alabama football is helping produce it. It's called the New Wave Podcast. Check it out. I'm sure it's going to be all over YouTube, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcast. Subscribe to that one, just like you subscribe to me. I really, I'm sure the guys would appreciate it. They say they're going to be talking about stories, kind of life on campus. Kind of more behind the scenes stuff. Not all football related, but I'm sure some of it will be. Another thing I wanted to mention, and I am curious about the thoughts on this one. I've heard mixed reviews, most of them positive, but obviously a few negative. And it's the C captain patches on the jerseys, right? So in the past, Saban always announced his captains postseason, right? After the season was over, they would announce their full-time captains, and those captains would end up getting their hands and feet cemented at Denny Chimes. But in this case, they announced the captains before the season, and because they had announced the captains before the season, the 4 guys that are our captains have the captain's patches on the jerseys. Something a little different. You don't often see too many changes with the Alabama jersey. So just curious kind of what everyone's thoughts are. I personally really like it. I think it looks good, but just curious on everyone's thoughts. Like I said, it definitely is, a little bit of a changing of the jerseys. Obviously nothing too extreme, but definitely something that we have not seen before, especially with how they're chosen. I chose my players of the week, but Alabama has come out with their players of the week, as has the SEC. So I actually want to run through those really quick. The SEC players of the week had Keon Sabb as defensive player of the week and Ryan Williams as a co-SEC freshman of the week. But those don't surprise me at all. The ones that Alabama chose don't surprise me at all either. But they did something unique that I've never seen before, and I thought that it was really cool and just wanted to give it a shout out. And I'll pop it up here on the screen, the graphic they have. But Alabama it looks like they're going to do their players of the week in a couple of different categories. So they have offensive skill, offensive power, offensive scout, special teams, defensive skill, defensive power, defensive scout, and then special teams scout. So the thing with that is obviously you've got a skill player and a power player, so more like a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and then obviously a lineman or tight end, and then defensive line versus like corners and linebackers kind of thing. But the other thing that you don't often see, and really the place where it surprised me, is they're recognizing the scout guys. And I think that's something that's really cool. It's not something you see super often, the scout team getting recognized. Typically, you only hear about somebody in scout team when it's like a big game and it's like, oh, we're using this guy on the scout team to mimic this specifically really good player or something like that. So it's just really cool for me to kind of and to see the team, recognizing some of the scout guys. So the official players of the week this week, as you'll see here on the screen, were Jalen Milroe, Tyler Booker, Graham Roten, James Burnup, Keon Sabb, John Campbell, Colby Peavy, and Jay Loper. So, huge shout out to Roten, Peavy, and Loper for getting that recognition on the scout team. Like I said, not something you see, that I've personally, I don't think I've ever seen it before, but it's just something that is really cool, and glad to see those guys get the recognition they deserve, because obviously they're practicing just like everyone else. They may not get the same game reps, but their practice and their ability on the scout team is something that's super crucial, especially for mimicking the team that you're going to be playing and, getting the team ready for the games that are going to be upcoming. So something really, really cool to see. And then the last thing that we'll cover, and I mentioned that I would at least mention the basketball recruits. So the basketball recruits that were on campus for this past week's game were top 30 recruit Davion Hannah, top 45 Jaden Holmes, and top 80 Amari Allen. Nate Oates was there with them. These are names you're going to hear from some sources from inside the program. Mac, if you're on 3, one of the big insiders, mentioned that Alabama's in a good place with all of these guys. You'll hear a lot about all of these different recruits that Alabama's going to have varying levels of interest in, and football season is a huge time for basketball recruiting as well as football recruiting, but a lot of the basketball recruits come to these football games. It's a good way to get, people that are interested in potentially coming to campus to kind of witness the atmosphere and the environment, and it's something that Nate Oates takes full advantage of. So in the coming weeks, there will be multiple players at all these games. I know we've talked about some of the big players that are going to be at that Georgia game. There's going to be players at this USF game. Just wanted to mention them as we get potentially further down the line where we'll potentially start seeing commitments, or if there's anything interesting that comes up on the recruiting front, I'll be sure to mention it. I just wanted to mention who was at the game. I didn't cover it before the game just because I didn't cover it in the recap because I wanted to cover the game specifically. And then the last thing, I forgot to mention, the last thing I want to cover is just like last week where Grant Nelson was going to JNJ and was the official JNJ partner for the week. This week's partner that's going to be signing jerseys and autographs for everyone is Chris Youngblood. So if you are interested in meeting Chris Youngblood will be at J&J Apparel in downtown Tuscaloosa, 5:30 on Thursday. J&J plans to do this for most of the home games, especially the big ones. The only one that I've heard that they might be missing is the Auburn game, due to the fact that it is that Thursday will be Thanksgiving. But most of the other home games, from what I'm hearing, they will be doing autograph signings. So if you are interested, I really recommend checking it out. Like I said, this week will be Chris Youngblood, so I'm sure checking it out and supporting J&J as well as Chris Youngblood, everyone would appreciate. They have a 20% off sale on everything basketball during the event. So